Hi everyone, thank you for coming to my talk today. I'm Emma, I work at the University of Edinburgh. I'm thrilled to be at Drupal Camp England, made the trip down from Scotland, and yeah, I'm thrilled to talk about UX here today and how we can all apply user-centered ideas to make a Drupal to be proud of. Tried to get that shorter, but just didn't happen in time for the proposal. What I have for you today is two parts to my session. So I'm going to talk a bit about me and Drupal and UX, and how those three things all interlink. So I'll talk a bit about how I got into Drupal, how I got into UX, what it is, what it does, its benefits, values, and then think about that within the Drupal community and the Drupalverse. And then the second part of my talk, I'm going to do a bit of a deep dive into some of the techniques and approaches I use working in UX, how I've applied them in Drupal, and just kind of open it out a bit more to share some of the ways that we do things. And I'm going to hang those off of kind of three sort of main stages, which, as I perceive things, sort of happen in Drupal. There's always a learning stage where we're trying to work out, is this going to be useful? How do we even start? Then there's a build stage. You can apply UX at that stage as well. And then there's a testing stage when something's got built and there's a need to do UX at that stage too. All right, so UX, Drupal and me. I run the UX service at the University of Edinburgh. What that service is there for is improving digital experiences using a combination of user research and content design. And that exists across the whole university. We're there for the whole university, so all of the digital experiences that the university provides. So there's a big prioritization piece there. We don't just look at websites, we also look at internal systems as well. Because of that, I need help all the time, and I also like to moan about it all the time. So that motivated me to put together and to run a community of UX professionals like me working in HE, and this is under a professional body called UCISA. And what I've learned from doing that is similar to what I've learned within Drupal, is the power of community when trying to solve things that are shared problems across different realms. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So what's all this got to do with Drupal, you're probably thinking? Well, the University of Edinburgh website, the whole web estate is on Drupal 10. We migrated from Drupal 7 in the nick of time before Drupal 7 reached end of life at the end of last year. We have a paragraphs editorial interface. We use the Gin admin theme. Our hosting is with Pantheon. And the way that web publishing works at the university, so who uses this system that we have at the university, we have people across the university distributed content editors, or web publishers as we call them. And they're not technical people, and they tend to have web publishing kind of tacked onto an existing job. We have, sadly, quite few people that actually do content design or web publishing as their main job. So, how did I get involved in Drupal? Well, when I first started working at the university, I had a look at our editorial interface. I wanted to learn more about it and how it was kind of put together. So that sort of led me to the Drupal community. And this is my kind of Dunning-Kruger curve of like how, you know, the competence versus confidence. So when I started at the university, watched some people use the editorial interface, watched them use paragraphs, so our content editors, and I was like, yeah, this is easy, I know how to do this is fine, and I can sort out how this can change, and blah, blah, blah. And Drupal, I know it all, like, you know, as you do when you first start learning about something. I got more involved with the community, and I thought, well, you know, I have UX skills, how can I be of use in what was perceived to sort of be quite a big development-heavy community when I sort of got involved in 2020. So I started, normally when I want to learn about something, I ask lots of people lots of irritating questions, so that's what I did. And Drupal Slack is brilliant for that. So I reached out to people, and I fell into Promote Drupal. And I met Suzanne, who at the time was leading the Drupal.org revamp. So I got involved in that, and I'll talk a bit about these pieces in a bit more detail. But that's when I started to realize, okay, there's maybe more to this than I first thought. You know, there's different ways of doing things in Drupal. There's different things you can do with it. And then that led me on to a piece of work which has been called Drupalisms. And this is all about Drupal terminology. And boy, learning about this, I really realized how much I still had to learn about Drupal and still have to learn. And so, yeah, kind of took a bit of a dip there. Most recently, I've been involved in doing some research and helping with the design of Drupal CMS, the new product, that Barry talked about earlier on. And yeah, I'm going to talk about a couple of these pieces of work in a bit more detail. So the Drupal.org restructure. This was an initiative led by Promote Drupal. And what this was about was looking at the Drupal.org website and thinking, who's visiting this and what do they need to do? We knew that developers visited the website and they had a bunch of needs, but we also knew people were coming to the website to sort of think about, you know, is Drupal a good CMS for me? So they were needing a bit more kind of hand-holding into it. And so what we did within the Promote Drupal group, we came up with a proposed sitemap for restructuring. And where I came in with my UX skills was doing some testing on that thing to work out, well, can people still find information from it? So that was in 2022. What I learned from being involved with that, even though it wasn't directly a UX initiative, was it was a super useful exercise to learn about Drupal audiences more broadly in the wider Drupalverse, within the community, but also beyond. I also learned a ton about the different features and functions and some of the selling points that make Drupal great and better than some other CMSs out there. Because when you have to structure that information into a website and think about how somebody would find it, it's a really good way to learn about Drupal. Drupalisms. So this came in 2023. I was involved with another piece of work that was looking at restructuring the admin interface, so the kind of internal facing, so different interface, but this time sort of aimed at people using Drupal to build things. And what came out of that was there was a lot of ambiguity over some of the words in Drupal. And this isn't just a Drupal issue. It happens in lots of systems. People use words in different ways to mean different things. But what that means is that for people coming new to Drupal, it's confusing and they don't know where to start and they don't know what's happened before. So got a small group of us together in 2023 and we're working towards a control vocabulary. This is a big piece of work, hence why the issue has got plan written in capital letters at the beginning. And if you're interested in this, come and grab me and I can talk about it because I could fill the whole time talking about this. But what I'm learning about doing this piece of work, analysing Drupal's language, is more about how it works, how it's set up, why it works the way it does. And it's challenging me to look at ways of analysing complexities away from subjective knee-jerk changes to complexity to try and eliminate complexities, actually thinking about how we make those more understandable to people. This is also a really good exercise running this issue and leading this issue in working in the community, because what I've found from doing this over the last sort of year or so, there's a huge amount of enthusiasm to open up Drupal's language and to make it more accessible and inclusive, so that everybody can start learning Drupal quickly. However, it's not a quick job, right? So what I'm trying to do is kind of balance that enthusiasm, harness that, but equally manage expectations that getting real tangible benefits for this is not going to be a quick thing. Most recently, up-to-date Drupal CMS. So I was super lucky. I put myself forward when I heard about Drupal CMS, watching the Dries note last year. I thought this so speaks to what we are trying to do at the university, which is like have a CMS that doesn't require that technical knowledge. So I was like, I want to help. And Drupal community, as usual, kind of brought me in and I worked out a way that I could be useful. So I helped define the personas and archetypes of the target users. New ground, this is reaching out to people who don't use Drupal at the moment, so we had to do understanding of who those people were. We also wanted to think about what was out there already, because we understood that people would have a choice with Drupal CMS versus other products out there, so there was benchmarking work. I also worked on the content modeling. Baddy talked about the selection of content types that were in version 1. We did research to work out what was the right selection of those to include. And most recently, I've done UX research on some of the AI features at the end of last year. This is really helpful to learn more broadly, really zoomed out, how people want to make websites in general. Again, Baddy talked about this a bit earlier. Like what the expectations are around that, how people want to put content online, what trends are driving that, and how Drupal can really like put our strengths towards them to help solve those. Okay, I'm going to talk a bit about what UX is really and what it can do, because UX can sometimes be misunderstood, and that's our fault, like my fault. People who work in UX tend to talk in UX ways. We don't do a particularly good job at opening it out to people, so I always try and talk this through a little bit in my talks. So most people grasp UX and understand UX and talk about it when they relate it to an interface. So, because this is typically where UX happens, right? This is where somebody interacts with an interface. They try and do something. They either do it well or they kind of struggle about with it. So the interface is the thing that people sort of focus on. And then because of that, the issues appear at the interfaces. So for example, I've watched people use this trying to add an image, and they're going, how do I add an image? Because they're looking for the word image. They're scanning across those words and thinking, nope, can't see the word for image. So it's really tempting to just go, well, that's easy. Just like put a big red box around it and go, that's where the images are. It's really, really tempting to do that. The problem is with doing that, and just by looking at the interface, is that you solve one problem, but you kind of might then produce another as well. So it does require a bit of a deeper dive, and it depends on multiple factors. So here's my wonky collection of cogs that go together. So kind of this top layer here, you've got what's happening from the user side. So they're bringing their language, how they speak, their ways of working, what tasks they want to complete. And then on the lower level, you've got all of this that's making whatever they're using. So the user interface is definitely one part of that, and the language that's used in the content model, but the content model and the system structure are also feeding into that. And you can only control some of them, so you have really no control. If you're building something, we're building something in Drupal for people to use, you don't have any control on those grayed out things on the top level, so the user language, ways of working, that's kind of out there. That's going to happen regardless of what you do. But you do have control of the stuff on the bottom. And what that can result in is sometimes called disruptive innovation, but also sometimes called user-led innovation. So you have the power to change how systems work based on users' ways of working. And that can be really uncomfortable sometimes, especially if things have been done in a certain way. But the reality is that the way that people expect things to work, that's out there. So if we want our product to do that job and be their choice, we have to be mindful of that. Okay, so applying that to Drupal then, what I see as maybe the opportunities, but also the challenges within Drupal as an open source community and thinking about what we do. Apologies, anybody's seen my talks before, this one comes out a lot, the Venn diagram. So what typically we have in Drupal, we have the best developers in the world, I think. We have people that are so talented in the development side that can come up with the most amazing solutions that really push technology to the limit. I don't think anybody does that better than us in our community. What UX does is uncovers the needs. So you've got the solutions on the one side, UX is getting that understanding of users, that top level, understanding all of that information, so that then you've got the opportunity for that innovation to happen when those two intersect. The challenge is, within the community, at the moment, we have huge development strength, I think, and like a real powerhouse of solutions, but we don't have the same representation on the UX side. And that's not unusual to Drupal, to be honest. But it does mean, you can't have that sweet spot of user-centered innovation. And also with them working in silos, so there'll be UX people uncovering needs, but maybe not connecting with developers to understand, would this information be useful for you for what you're building or what you're thinking of building? So I think we can do a better job, because I think we've got more opportunities for working together, framing problems, and getting some user-driven innovation. It all looks super simple when you just do it in a Venn diagram, but in the reality, it's not so. But, and here's my plea, I would love to get more people involved in contributing to Drupal UX and getting more of an understanding of what people want to use Drupal for. And you don't have to be a UXer to do this. You don't have to be trained in this. I'm going to open up some of the approaches we use. And, some of these might resonate, some of them won't, but it would be good to swell the Drupal UX side of things. Here's a UX design process. Again, another, we're so good in UX at making diagrams of things, but it's actually a lot messier, but it doesn't look as good on a slide. So typically what happens when things get made, there's a stage where you're thinking, okay, there's an opportunity here to make something, to build something. So we need to kind of learn like what we're going to do. We need to sort of sound that out, do a bit of discovery, sometimes it's called. We then move into the build, and it might be making something, but it might also be changing something. So it might be going, this is how we do this thing now, but we've realized, there's a trend that people expect this to be different, or there's a trend that everybody else is following. So, there's a kind of opportunity for a change. You can apply UX here at this learn stage to tap into that. When the build stage, you've kind of decided what you're going to make or how you're going to change it. You can apply UX at that stage as well to make sure it's user-centered. When you've built the thing, you typically want to then measure that to find out, okay, let's test it. Let's actually see what it did. And that's typically where UX comes in. But I'm going to talk through how you can apply it at each of these different stages. So at the learn stage, and this is kind of the scoping stage, and this is something I really like doing to like work out the context, and we've got to do it a lot with Drupal CMS, as I'm going to explain. So here are some ways to find out like what's out there and how to use it. And this is difficult to describe in the abstract, but stick with me because I'll talk about it in relation to Drupal CMS to hopefully make it resonant. So there are multiple ways to get a feel for what's needed in whatever realm it is. So you might be changing a way something happens in Drupal, or you might be thinking of building a new module or a new feature. There's ways to think about, well, how's that going to land in the bigger picture? So a good way to do this from the bigger picture thinking side of things is to think, well, what happens if I don't build this? What happens if I don't change it? That gets you to think about what the impact is. You can also this is like trend mapping, really. Some people would argue this isn't UX, but I like doing it, so I pretend it's UX. You can identify like forces. So what Baddy was talking about before, like trends. So I watch my teenagers consume web content, and I'm like, okay, that's going to be a thing. And how's that going to actually manifest? What's that going to look like? People wanting to save time, for example. People wanting to get instant answers. What's all that going to look like? Once you've got that kind of idea, you can start to narrow down the underlying actions and think about how things work now. And all this is really valuable. Just watching people use stuff is really valuable to help you think about how to innovate. And also then to think, well, what does that depend on? If they want to work in that particular way, what needs to be underlying? What impacts what, basically? What are the relationships? Kind of mapping. That can help you then get to sources to find out more. So you start to learn about realms where you can get more information. Who's talking about this? Who's writing about this? Who cares about this? What are the arguments? So in relation to the CMS audience, it was a good example of doing this because we'd kind of decided, okay, this new product, we need to do this. We know that there's a trend to make websites easier to build and to be more available to non-technical people. But what does that really mean? Why do people even bother making a website? Well, there's a need. They have a need for something to be online, whether that's a place to socialize, whether that's a place for transactions, whether that's a place for exchanges on a very broad level. Digitalization, stuff is not happening so much in the analog form. Why is that? How's that actually manifesting? So that got us thinking about those areas. Thinking about, okay, there's a need. People need to put stuff online. How do they do it now? Well, they either go to a self-serve website builder, one of the competitors, or they go to a specialist provider. If they've got the money, they pay somebody to do it. So how can we learn more about this? This got us into thinking about sources. So we looked a lot at agency case studies, for example, reviews of different CMS. People discussing CMSs. Reddit is a fantastic place where people will kind of honestly review things and ask questions and getting some data. And that helps you to get the user data because that's really where you want to get to. You want to get in your head a kind of people who are going to be impacted by whatever you're making or whatever you're going to build because you want to really engage in a conversation with them. And this might feel like alchemy, and when I started working in UX, I was kind of feared of making contact with people who use stuff, but actually people are very willing to talk about how they do things because it's not arduous for them. You're not putting them at the test, you're really just asking them, I'm really interested about how you build a website. Can you talk me through how you do that? The key thing when you can get somebody to hear from, to help you learn about whatever you're thinking about, is to ask them about how things happen now. It's super tempting to go, I've got a great idea for something and I want to run it past you. But the problem is, people, and myself included, when they're presented with something like that, it's a disposition to please the person that's asking. So you'll give nice feedback, even if you think, I can't really understand that, or I don't really know how I would use that. And while that data might make you feel really good about whatever your idea is, it's not an honest representation, because typically humans behave in a similar way. And so asking them about the present, that's factual. Asking about how they might work in the future, they'll guess, but it won't be an accurate piece of data for you. So that's a key part in kind of UX land, to ask about how things happen now. You're then looking for patterns, particularly like themed behavior. So for example, if they say, well, I do that to save time, and then they do lots of things to save time, so you'll understand, then you'll start to realize like the motivations for why they behave. And how do they sort things when they go wrong? So how far did they get before they abandon whatever it is? That's a really key thing to learn. Role plays can be very helpful technique, can feel a bit weird to start off with, but if you've got this understanding, and we did this for CMS, thinking about, well, how would they deal with this in context? Like, what would their day look like? They've got the thing in front of them, how would they actually act? So again, kind of tracking back for Drupal CMS, we did exactly some of the things I've talked about. Tell me about the last website you built. How do you do this now? If you need a website, what do you do? And looking for kind of patterns. So typically, people don't want to keep on reinventing the wheel. If they find something that works in terms of a website, they'll go back to a template. They'll go so far and then they get stuck and I have to help. But also they would say, get so far and get stuck and I abandon it. I just use something that's like suboptimal when I'm building a website. Some of the role plays, like the speed aspect was coming through with the Drupal CMS audience. I've got this event and I need to get it up today. I'm being pressed. I've got a case study that I need to publish and the person's just sent me the logo. So this was kind of guiding how we would build it. You can't research everything though. When you come to build stuff, you can't have, it'd be a utopian universe if you had a complete understanding of everything. And then it wouldn't be innovative either, because there has to be some surprise. But one thing with UX is a set of heuristics, which is a kind of fancy word for saying sort of UX laws. Basically stuff that people have already worked out from user research. And it's linked to psychology, so you can be assured that some of these you can apply to whatever you're wanting to build, or if you're wanting to change something, use these as guidance to help you make your decisions. So there's a couple here. Don't reinvent. Sometimes called Jacob's Law, after a guy called Jacob Nielsen, who set up Nielsen Norman Group, which is a kind of UX specialist body and a kind of think tank. So users expect things to work the same way. They'll spend 99% of their time on other people's websites, for example. So you can put novelty interaction patterns in there, but you might be better putting your innovation elsewhere, because if you do that, you might actually hold back a user from interacting, which isn't really what you want to achieve. Complexity. This very much applies to Drupal. Some of the ways that things are done in Drupal, they have complexity, and they have complexity for a reason, because they've been built in a particular way. And the key thing with the complexity is to not mask it, because then you add extra confusion. If you try and abstract it or make it vague, then that can actually make things worse. So breaking it down into steps is a good way to go with that. Linked to this, try and not overwhelm people. So give people what they need when they need it. Again, people, this is a kind of a general heuristic based on the fact that we as humans can only hold so much information in our brains at a time. So you want to avoid giving people too much, because our response, if we have choice overload, is to kind of abandon it. So you want to avoid that. Thinking about how this applied to Drupal CMS version 1, when we were looking at what we would put in, we used benchmarking data. So we looked at competitors for Drupal CMS, and we thought about how they did things. So we looked at how their dashboards were set up, what the installation process was, what the content model was, because we wanted people to to bring people in without giving them extra stuff to deal with. When it came to complexity, one example I can give and talk about a little bit later as well in more depth is in terms of looking at the AI assistants. So some of you may have seen the Dries note in Barcelona, where Dries demoed the AI assistants, actually helping a person do stuff in Drupal. And working with Jamie, we had some choices to make there when I did some UX research, whether the AI assistant would give out the instructions in Drupal terms and tell it exactly as it was with the proper labels, or whether it would talk in kind of vaguer terms. And actually what we found was people wanted the precise information. But to try and make that palatable for them, we put it in an instruction format. So the chatbots were labeling it one step after the other, so people could, the complexity was there, but there was a way to kind of work through it. In terms of trying to not overwhelm, this played out, for example, in the dashboard, trying to work out, okay, well, here's the dashboard, people could do everything here. How do we put that together? Well, we put a list of top tasks together. And when it came to putting the content types together, obviously we could build a million different types of content types, sorts of content types, but actually thinking about giving people enough to get started was more important and not kind of overwhelming them. Typically, where UX happens in Drupal, to my mind, is something's been built and people care about like how well it's going to work. Is it going to do the job? What's the UX like? And that's where the measure part comes in. So this is where you can apply UX at the measure part. And I'm going to talk about two things: identifying indicators and testing hacks. Oops. So the first thing, when I'm asked, or somebody in my team or somebody I work with, we're presented with something that somebody's built and asked to like do a job on the UX, tell people about the UX, you have to kind of be clear on what good looks like. And that involves like thinking about indicators. So what clues will tell you that whatever you've made or changed that you've made, for example, has done a good job? Has it made things better? Has it made it worse? So this is kind of fancy speak, but predictions and hypotheses, basically you're just writing down, if I see this, then I'll know that this has happened. How will I know if it's gone well? What will I look for, to tell me it's gone badly? And also thinking about when you're going to test this, thinking about that test scenario and how it will actually happen when you put something in front of a user, for example. Think about all the data that will come out of it and how you might make use of it, because interactions with people that use Drupal stuff are so valuable to help us learn how to make Drupal better. So it's really worth thinking, what else can I ask when I get them in the room? What will I see? What will I hear? And so on. So if anybody's struggling to sleep, I can recommend my blogs about the AI assistant research. They are not my finest piece of writing, I have to say, and I got very nerdy about it, but I absolutely love doing this research. And so when it came to the testing, I was thinking, this is going to be like drinking from a fire hose. I'm going to put a chatbot in front of people and I'm going to ask it to help them do stuff. My God, right. So I had to think in my head, okay, Emma, what are you going to see here that's going to indicate that it's a good job? Because otherwise you're going to go, thanks, okay, and move on. So, and that wouldn't be like much good for Jamie and the team thinking about making these more user-centered. So I thought to myself, right, well, if they can actually engage in a dialogue with the AI assistants, like using terms they'd naturally use, that's a win. If they can understand what it's saying and come back, that's something to look for. Like I've said, positive versus negatives. If they're going, what, and they kind of inclined to leave the chatbot, that's a negative, right? So that was one thing. There are more, and as I said, like read my blogs, there's a lot of information there. I was very conscious, like breaking down what data would come from this. So for context, I did some user tests where I put interfaces with chatbots in front of university staff to see what they'd make of them. Would they find them useful? Would they find them usable? I knew from that, and I recorded those, I knew from that I was going to be able to see what they were doing on screen. I was also going to get a transcript of them talking about what they were doing, and also from the back end of the AI assistants, the logs and the responses, I was going to get data as well. So I was kind of mapping all of that out. Oops. kind of related to this, testing hacks, you're in front of a user if you get a user in the room. Some things to sort of bear in mind. Let them do things freely. So you're really testing the system or whatever you want their help with. You're not testing their ability to be able to do it, so they can't do anything wrong. This can be really hard because you can be watching somebody do something and think, why are they not clicking there? Why can they not see this thing? You have to be quiet. I'm terrible at it. I have to pinch myself. And I've been doing this for years, but you really have to let that data, let them get to the end. If you really want to ask, and you probably will if you're like me, then you wait for the action to finish. So you ask them to do a task, you let them get to the end, and then you can say something like, can I ask you at this stage, did you notice this thing? Or can I ask you at this stage, what were you thinking when you made that choice? Sometimes they might not know, but it's important to sort of let it happen naturally. Expect the unexpected. It might, and it probably will, go off course from, we're all guilty of this, we all make things, and it makes sense to our mental models, but you bring in somebody else with a completely different way of thinking, and they'll challenge it. And that's kind of what it's about. That gives you useful information, but write it out to the end. Also, if it goes wrong, how people handle errors gives you another source of valuable data. So although you might feel, oh God, what do I do? I'll have to pull the test, so on. Actually say, if this happened in real life, how would you deal with that? Because it gives you another way of looking at it. And essentially, this stuff will happen. So if you can actually see that happening on a test, it gives you another level of information to engage with your user. Get used to silences. Again, you can be listening, you can be watching them do something and then not be speaking, but I don't tend to speak when I'm interacting with a website because I need silence to concentrate. So that's something just to bear in mind. It can be very tempting to ask people questions throughout and fill the silence, but actually then you might stymie the data that you can get. Again, sorry, the AI assistant tests, more stuff, more learning from this. When doing these tests, so for context again, when I recruited people to test these AI assistants, I didn't tell them beforehand that that's what they were there for, because I really wanted to recruit on the basis of anybody could use these, and so I wanted to understand how they would naturally interact. So I introduced the chatbot and I said, imagine that you're asking somebody next to you how to do this, because that's how, that might help you to interact. So I really wanted to be clear I wasn't going to be prompting them or telling them what to put in. There was a part in the test where they were all clicking at a part of the chatbot and trying to do something, and I couldn't understand why that was. And so I had held my nerve, and at the end I was, can I ask you, when you were clicking on the chatbot at this area, what were you trying to do? It turns out they were trying to move it out the way because they wanted to see the interface below it, because they were reading the information that was coming out of the chatbot, wanting to act on it and wanting to see the full interface. Expect the unexpected. So Jamie and I worked together very closely on this, about what's the best way to offer up the information, because some people want the AI to do the tasks for them. For example, add fields to a content type, the AI would say, yes, I can do that for you. Would you like me to proceed? Or they might want the instructions. They might want the AI to tell them, here's how you do it, and they could follow the instructions. And we went back and forward over this. What should it do? Which one should it offer? So we felt, well, it needs to offer them the choice. It needs to say, take the question and then say, well, I can do it for you, or do you want the instructions? And when it did that, somebody said both in the test. So, but we had to, then leave that and go, okay. And actually, when they did that, they realized that wouldn't be that helpful. So then the chatbot responded, and that was fine. And they said, actually, give me the instructions first. I'll see how complicated it is. And then when I saw how many steps there were, the person was saying this, I'll actually decide that you can do it for me. The AI glitched. AI does this, and this isn't just a Drupal AI thing. It just happens, with technology in general. But that was useful. Instead of kind of pulling the test, I said, well, how would you do that if you were using this naturally? They opened another tab, and they got and they Googled. So that was interesting to see what kind of response they expected from that. Waiting for people to type and read. there was a lot of silence there, and they were processing what the chatbot said and then thinking about how they would respond. But that was watching them learn Drupal in real time. They were making sense of what the chatbot was telling them to do and learning how to do things. So there was silence. Wrapping up, because I know Gareth is ready. Bit of a recap. We've talked about what good UX is and thinking about it's a state beyond interfaces. Talked a bit about UX in the Drupalverse and in the community, and I've shared with you some techniques and case studies from what I call like my UX toolkit under those 3 broad headings. I'll take some questions, but we're a bit short on time. I'm around all day if you want to ask me about anything. And if you fancy contributing to Drupal UX, I'm gathering people together who are interested in this, so I would encourage you to please reach out to me on Drupal Slack or my email or my LinkedIn as well. And that's me. Thank you. Hello.
Thanks so much for that talk. Really, really interesting. You covered the competitor analysis with other CMS.
Yep.
If you had to sum up in a few short sentences what Drupal most needs to prioritize and improve still with respect to UX, what would you say?
I think it's the entry in, it's the onboarding. And this is not just an us problem, but just more and more people now are wanting to build websites and they don't know how to do it and they just want it to happen quickly with a click. And that's where they have the choice. So I think what we need to do a better job of is onboarding them and also at the same time selling why Drupal is better for them. And the way I see it on a very basic level is that people start and they produce a website for one purpose, but then they very quickly realize I want it to do this thing, and I don't want to have to build another thing to do that. If we could encapsulate that into a nice sentence, I think that, so it's kind of, maybe it's a bit of marketing and a bit of kind of exposing what we're about a bit better, but then trying to do that in an onboarding process. And I think having watched the AI assistants and the capabilities of that, I think, and also with the, tapping into that trend of how people expect to learn stuff, I think there's a real opportunity there for us to dive into. Does that, yeah.
Thank you, great answer.
Thank you. Hi.
I got a question. Thank you ever so much for that talk. I've worked with lots of UXers. I used to be a developer. I'm a massive advocate of UX now, but most of the UXers I work with, they're very much user-focused from a website user's point of view,
Yep.
from a back-end point of view.
Yep.
And I think it's really admirable, particularly the fact that you're not a Drupal agency person, you're a university person. Is there one piece of advice you could give us who love Drupal that might encourage more UXers to get more involved with Drupal as a project?
That's a difficult one. It's something I'm passionate about, and that's why I'm trying to kind of build the UX community now. I think, certainly for me, learning about that, maybe, kind of back-end use, maybe, because it could be a content editor, it could be a developer using Drupal, but those are experiences as well that are to be optimized. For me, learning about those perspectives helps me learn Drupal better. And then, for us as a Drupal user, maybe that's where my perspective comes from. At the university, we want to keep using Drupal, so I can see a vested interest in making it better because it will secure, it for us for the future. So your question about, I guess I'd try and understand what the blockers are for people wanting to be involved in Drupal from the UX perspective, and if it is just sort of the website user, because that is quite a narrow view, and it can depend on many factors. I would say, certainly most UXers I know, you get better at UX the more you challenge yourself to think of different experiences. It's very boring, researching the same experience over and over. So for that purpose, Drupal is amazing because the community, as I said, the opportunity to work with so many different talented, innovative people and to think about how those ideas can be focused towards users, I would say is a big selling point for us to get involved. But put them in contact with me and then I'll sell it. Hi.
Hi. So I'm somebody who did do Drupal UX about 7 or 8 years ago, and it's it's really nice to see that there's always new people, but on the other hand, it's also motivating to see that as those of us who have done UX, we
Yep.
seem to burn out at some point.
Yep.
And I think the biggest bottleneck is that when we do UX, we come up with feature requests, or we come up with issues
Yep.
that we need somebody else to fix.
Yep.
And then we deal with core and module maintainers who have a lot of stuff already on their plate. And we just add something in their whole pile of issues.
Yeah.
And they tend to get lost in there.
Yeah.
Especially when, as a UX person, you're not a developer. You can't contribute to making that patch.
Yeah.
So I think we need to find a way of dealing with this bottleneck.
Yeah.
That a module developer instead of going, oh, yet another issue, they go,
Yeah.
oh, wait, there's some UX support. Let's fix this first.
Yeah. It is a hard thing to measure within. It is a hard thing to reconcile within the community. I don't have a defined answer. I mean, my talk today is talking about how other people can adopt UX. We, as UXers, and it talks to your point, need to understand the needs of people within the community, you know, for their experiences, to look for those opportunities. It's basically, I guess, it's a wider awareness, and I think very much within the community, the same, you know, there are like the same goals that are shared across different individuals. So the more, and like kind of talks to my trend scanning sort of work, the more we can join the dots on that and spot those opportunities, I think that helps the problem. But yeah, it's being visible in the community, it's making connections, and it's like learning from people as well, I think, can all help that. But it's not a quick thing to solve because we're an open source community, so it's hard, to be honest, to even do it a UX setup where you have a development team and UX working together to get that communication to happen. So within the community, it does rely very much on the kind of impetus of individuals and working in the open as well to make sure these things are known about so that it's not a surprise if people are asked about stuff, if that helps. But yeah. I think we have Aaron, maybe your question, but then Gareth. I don't want to eat into Gareth's time.
I was just going to add something that, just from what you're saying. And first of all, I probably say you're serious on AI, and it's really interesting. But just in that point, one of the things that I do, and Emma sometimes goes on to, is that every Friday we have in Drupal, we have the Drupal usability group calls. And one of the things that was really good about that is it brings together people who are UXers, people who are developers, and people who are somewhere in between. And some of the things that come out of that call are many initiatives around. So, for instance, one of the things we did is spearheaded to reorganize the blocks UI in Drupal. So, if you noticed, and I think it was Drupal, sometime in Drupal 9 or 10. The custom blocks got moved under content, and block layout got moved around under structure. So we were actually responsible for pushing forward with that because we had people who are interested in UX, who are UXers coming together saying identifying the problem, and then developers who can make those changes coming together and getting behind that. So I just think that's a really good example of where that can work, but I don't know how we scale that up. That's the problem. So you've only got so many people that are doing that. So
Yeah.
I think it's a cultural thing at the end of the day, right?
It is. Yeah.
And yeah, for anybody who that broke their heart, well, sorry, but it was for the greater good. We could redirect in place. It's fine.
Cool. Are you ready, Gareth? Let's try and switch things over for you. Thanks, everyone.